People of Earth, it is I, the Great Goonan, and this is the Great Goonan Podcast, and I'm here today with Charley Sabatino, musician, bassist, and music teacher, and the man with the glasses as well. How are you, Charley?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Now, Charley and I know each other because he played bass in the band that performed my theme song in my web series, Tune Into Goonan, which is still up, and a new episode just came out not too long ago. It still uses all that music. We recorded so much music and little sound effects and little dramatic effects and stuff like that. So I still use all of that, and that's how we know each other. So I see you got your upright bass back there. I see that it's back there, and that's what you played. That's what you played on my show, but you also play the electric bass, right?
Yes, I do. It's right there.
Oh, it's right back there too. Now, what kind of electric bass you got?
I'm a Lakeland artist. It's a company out of Chicago. They make amazing stuff.
All right.
They're a great company. They make just amazing gear. They're known for just like good working instruments, comfortable, good sound, you know, that kind of stuff. That's what they're known for.
And you were always into the bass? Is that the only instrument you play is the bass?
It's all I ever wanted to do. I actually I remember the minute it happened. I was in early high school. My friend Angus McGeckran came over.
There's a name.
Yeah, let me mute my phone. I apologize. He was a buddy of mine, and he played bass. And he came over, and he took an album of Quadrophenia from The Who, put it on, and I listened to John Entwistle, and I went, "That's what I want to do." And it's always been. And
is that the guy who you most love, or is it Ray Brown? Is it Ron Carter? Is it?
Well, that's where it started. That's where it started for me. You know, and because I was a kid, and then I went in to rock. I went into fusion and progressive music, and then into jazz. And yeah, Ray Brown, obviously Ron Carter. There are a lot of other players that I've listened to over life. Cecil McBee is another player that I listen.
Oh, you're frozen.
To a lot.
There you go.
Cecil McBee is another one that I listen to a lot. But then as I got
Cecil, that's interesting about Cecil is that I don't really know him, but his wife was in one of my shows.
Really?
Yeah. I think she sings now, but she wasn't singing then. She's a German woman. And she was in one of my stage shows a long time ago.
Yeah, I like the way he sounds. And what happened to me, and I play a little piano because I was in school. I did a little. I tried to avoid it. I use it mainly when I'm writing. The teachers that I had, and my ears started going not away from the bass, but holistically the music. Listening to all of it. So it's not just keying in on the bass player. It's listening to the whole thing. I remember. One of my professors, or actually I heard one of my friends said to me, you don't go to a symphony and go, that viola part. You listen to the whole, unless you're a viola player or the viola player, it's the holistic whole of the music. I was just talking to a person on social media before we spoke, and was saying that, players that do acrobatics, that's fine, but it's the whole song.
Yes.
It's the vocals and the music behind it. I've been
a great respect for the melody, also. A lot of times
it's the interaction of the melody.
A lot of times, people who are approaching jazz for the first time think that it's all just, right. But they don't realize that the greatest players respect the melody, and they improvise too. But I mean, they understand and love the melody.
Or should understand and love melody in general, because when you're improvising, it's your melody over the song. Think about, everybody talks about Donna Lee. Well, what's Donna Lee? It was Back Home Again in Indiana chords, and they put something else over it.
Right. Right.
So it's another melody. George Russell, who was an amazing jazz performer, musicologist, arranger, talks about vertical and horizontal harmony. right? And other players, Persichetti talks about this, Talkport talks about this as well, other musicologists. But you have the vertical harmony, which are the chords, and the horizontal harmony, which is the melody you make with those chords. Right. It's the, you may find you play over the changes, but you got to tell me something.
Exactly. What do you have something to say? Exactly.
Right.
Now, I'm also a musician too. I play the kazoo. So let's not forget.
You studied kazoology.
Yes. You have not lived till you've heard St. James Infirmary on my kazoo, which I may or may not do before the night is over. But
I'm in.
And you now you teach also. You teach music now.
I've been teaching for years. I've taught most of my career. I've taught. I started teaching early on because it was lucrative, and then started gigging more as my career went on. And then, as well as I do, performance isn't the most lucrative in a lot of places, especially in the jazz world. I started teaching more because I was able to. I have a family, and obviously once COVID hit, right? What happened is as technology kicked up, I was able to teach more because I did a lot of remote. I've been teaching remotely since 2010. I've taught on 6 continents.
Like this?
So
like a Zoom type thing? Yeah.
On 6 continents.
Yeah.
So it just became more lucrative, and it allows me also to do the other things I want to do, pick the gigs that I want to do, work on my own music, things like that. Plus, I enjoy it. I enjoy teaching.
Well, that's
I like the academic approach to music.
And I was going to ask you, do you like when you see, then maybe they're young and maybe they're not. I'm going to assume they're younger. Let's say younger people, to introduce them to types of music, to see the discovery of not only different types of music, but what they can do.
Yeah, I don't teach many young students over my lifetime because bass, usually young people generally go for guitar, drums, and
or singing
and piano, or singing.
Right.
Bass players, even when they're younger, they're older.
Right.
I've mainly taught adults. I don't know why, but that's what I've taught. What I find is interesting is when you take a player that's been playing 35 years or 25 years or 10 years. And is a good player, but then you start filling in the holes so they realize, so that's why I do this. So that's why I do that. Oh, then I can do this. And they start getting the thought process in, and their playing just opens up.
Yeah. Now you were mentioning the Who, but then you got into jazz, and I always think that all roads point to jazz. Like that's how I feel, because I'm a huge jazz fan. And that's something you and I have in common. Like you just mentioned a bunch of things that maybe people watching didn't even know. Like Donna Lee, that's a Charlie Parker.
Back Home Again in Indiana.
That's a Charlie Parker piece, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, Donna Lee, it depends on who you talk to.
Right. It's like Coco is Cherokee.
Right. But if when you talk to Phil Schaap, he believed Miles Davis wrote Donna Lee.
Oh, it's possible because Davis was his trumpeter.
Right. This was a big bone of contention he had. He believed that it was Miles Davis and Tiny Khan, who was a horn player. I believe he was a horn player, because some of the melody he was based on a song called Tiny's Khan. Now, a lot of people fight this. They say it was Charlie Parker. I'm just saying it depends on who you talk to. But the jazz guys, what they regularly did, and classical guys did this too, is that they took framework and then made another song out of it.
Absolutely. Well, that's a funny thing that people don't realize, because classical music is it's almost like saying I read Shakespeare. It's such an abstract idea to people that they don't realize these were musicians. These were people taking from other people. These were people influenced by other people. These were people trying to make a living. These were people trying to be stars, and just the way we think of them today, but in a different way,
Right, but and they dealt with a lot of the stuff that other musicians had to deal with. If you think about some of the jazz guys, they got crap from people for the music or what they did or their lifestyle. The rock and roll guys, if you've ever listened to some of the evil, racist and horrible things that the rock and roll guys went through, the classical guys went through the same thing. Right. In the late 19th century, Richard Strauss wrote Salome, which was an opera. And it was a biblical thing, but it had some sexual overtones. When he played it, when he premiered it, the people rioted. They burnt the theater. It's called the night of scandal. They burnt the theater down. So you think that classical people like, these prim and proper? No.
Right.
Arnold
And
Schoenberg,
wasn't Figaro banned? They weren't allowed to do Figaro. Mozart wasn't allowed to do Figaro because it was considered a scandal.
Arnold Schoenberg, after he played one of his pieces, he was in a bar or something afterward, and a guy picked a fight with him.
Because of the material.
Yeah, you're terrible. How dare you do this?
It's unbelievable. Sometimes I
mean,
wonder,
it's all the way through.
Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to get a fella like, let's say, a Schoenberg or or even go back to like a Beethoven or a Mozart or a Brahms and have them meet a Louis Armstrong or a Miles Davis or a Jimi Hendrix and it would blow their mind, the differences, but I think that they would love each other.
Right, because the one thing I tell my students all the time, and I try to do this in my own playing as well, the only requirement we have as artists is to evolve. That's it. I want to your art should move. And not saying it has to be totally different, but it's got to move as you move.
Right.
As you improve or as you change, it should move. And that's what happens with art, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and if it's not that, if you're standing still, then you're not doing anything good.
Right. When Miles started doing the fusion stuff, he got all kinds of crap, and he says, "I don't want to play this stuff from the quintet days. That was 1957. It's not 1957 anymore.
You're talking
I
about
want to do something else.
You're talking about like Bitches Brew and all that stuff.
Yeah, he says, I want to do something else. And actually, before that, he actually did some free jazz in what they call the Lost Quintet.
Like an Ornette Coleman type stuff.
Yeah, it was Chick Corea. I don't remember the bass player. Of course, I'm blanking. I think it was Jack DeJohnette. I don't remember the people offhand now. I have to look it up. But Chick Corea was part of it, and it was out.
Yeah.
Out.
Yeah. And these musicians, a lot of time, within the musical world, they were always miles ahead in with race. Like they were always interacting, even back in the 20s and 30s when they couldn't necessarily record. They were always going to the jam sessions and learning from each other, and there was a lack of discrimination in the world of music amongst musicians.
Well, that's why a lot of times they went to Europe, because people could mix race. The races could mix. A black man could be in a bar talking to a white woman and not get killed. In Europe, you could get away with that. In fact, I remember watching a program on World War II, and I remember when there was just before Normandy, we had a lot of troops going over to get ready for the invasion, and we had segregated military, and the British were very uncomfortable with that. They couldn't do anything about it because we were helping them, but they were really uncomfortable with the fact that they were segregated military.
Right.
It was a different world. It still is a different world in a lot of ways. For that
when you teach the bass.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think for a newcomer is the biggest misconception or mistake that people make?
Couple of things. Posture is one of them. The physicality of it, because especially that one, if you fight that instrument, it will hurt you. Okay?
That's a big fella.
Not learning the notes on the neck well enough and forcing and relying on patterns. Fortunately or unfortunately, we as a species have done well with patterns. We build 4 walls and a roof, we don't die in the winter, right? So what happens is you learn a pattern. The problem is when you learn a pattern, you play the pattern. It's like if you got a chance to move to Spain tomorrow and work a good job and live there, and you said, you know what, I'm just gonna go with a phrase book. I'll be fine. No, you got to be conversational. When you play patterns, you're just playing somebody else's stuff. It's like going out with a bunch of friends and talking in movie quotes.
Right. Okay.
Sooner or later, if your friends are like my friends, you're going to get punched in the face.
I see what you mean.
So it's understanding that it's note based, not lick based. Not even in jazz, you hear a lot of players where they have the Charlie Parker licks.
Yeah.
And that's what they use, as opposed to someone like, if you listen to someone like Clifford Brown, in my opinion, or you listen to someone like Booker Little, or you listen to someone like Eric Dolphy, where it's actual original lines.
Right. They don't you could sometimes hear in a musician where they learn things from. And you go, "Oh,
Right.
that's you're doing that. You're doing that." Yeah. Well, you could
Yeah,
hear that
I
in,
read the.
you could hear that in singers too. You could definitely hear that in
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
singers probably even
One of my.
more overtly, you know.
I had the privilege and honor to study with Billy Bauer, who was a guitar player, and he played with Charlie Parker. He played with all these big guys, and he told me, he said, Clark Terry told him the three levels of musicianship. Okay, imitation, assimilation, and innovation. Right? You'll listen to, if you talk about singers, you'll listen to Johnny Hartman, but you
Yeah.
don't copy Johnny Hartman. You might say, "Oh, I like some of the things he does. I'm going to make it Charles Goonan's," right? But you don't do Johnny Hartman because he's there. He existed already.
Right.
So it's that kind of, that's probably a big misconception too. And there are people I talk to on social media that are like, they copy players so much, you wonder if they wear the same underwear.
Yeah. Well, you have to understand, or they have to understand, like what you're saying, how to find your own voice. This is true in so many different fields, not just music, but the toughest thing to realize is who you are. You know, at first you think
That's something that takes the rest of your life because you change.
Yeah, right.
I used to teach an ensemble class right down the street here in a music school, and the guy that ran it was a friend of mine. He was a classical piano player, PhD from Manhattan School of Music, right? And when I brought this up to him that I wanted to do this, I was worried because sometimes classical and jazz don't mix. One of my teachers played classical and jazz, and the classical where he taught, the classical people always gave him crap because he played jazz. So I brought it to him. I started the class, and he loved it. And he said, "The thing I love about jazz is that it's always different." You get Charles Goonan as a singer when he's 19, 29, 39, 49, 59, 69. His style changes. Partly is that you improve, but partly is because you what's in your life becomes part of your improvisation. Right. He said in classical, in his opinion, you get Charles Goonan, piano player, every year. It's pretty much the same, maybe physically better, but the music is what the music is. There's some interpretation, but it is what it is.
Well,
in jazz, it moves.
You could say that. I was always trying to explain that to people, and I can't always explain it maybe in technical terms. I'm sure you can, but I was trying to explain that sometimes there is a bit of a difference with classical where it is a little more recitation and where American music is more interpretation.
Right. Well, it's and the thing that's really a shame is that Baroque music was improvisational. Bach was an improviser. If you when I did the gig for your show, right? You gave me a chord chart, right? And I followed the chords. Well, in Baroque music, they have the Baroque figured bass, which is a chord chart. Mm. So they improvise. The problem I have a friend of mine who teaches at York College in Queens, and his opinion was academia took them and said, "Okay, we're standardizing it, and that's what it is, and that's what came along," which kind of makes sense because one of the things that academia does is it standardizes stuff. Unfortunately, standardizing art is a difficult thing. How do you standardize something like that?
Yes, I've always said that. I've always said that too, especially about American music. But yeah, and it also is worse because the fellas you're talking about, like Bach and stuff, well, we don't really have them doing it, right. So it's a little bit different to say like Miles Davis because you have Miles Davis's recordings, right. So it's
and what the problem was too is up until recently, 20th century maybe. In the classical period, they would play Baroque music. Well, actually, it was late classical, but say romantic. The romantic composers, if they played older music, they would play it in the style of the romantic music, which doesn't make sense. You're stylizing it to yourself. Later on, I was saying in the 20th century, they started playing Baroque music like Baroque, playing classical music like classical, etc. And then the differences started showing one another instead of just saying like, yeah, those Baroque people, they don't know what they're doing. I'm going to play it my way. Well, wait a minute. It's like the difference. I'd use a lot of culinary analogies when I teach because I'm Italian American. Duh. It's
represent.
It's like It's like the difference between Italian American food and regional Italian food.
Right, right.
They're different. You can't use one. I mean, there's influence, but they're different.
Right.
And you can't say one is. You can't say, well, that's not what I'm used to. Yeah, but you're from Queens. That's different than Tuscany.
Yeah.
It's not better or worse. It's different. And if you're gonna cook in the idea of Tuscany, then you have to cook in the idea of Tuscany.
And what you were
so it's
saying,
the same idea.
What you were saying about different versions and stuff like that. I remember a while back. This is a long time ago. I'll tell you how long ago this was. I was in Sam Goody. So that's how long ago this was. I was getting some CDs, and I was getting it with my brother at the time, and he didn't like the same type of music. I like jazz and stuff like that, and jazz pop and all that stuff. And I was getting an Armstrong CD, Louis Armstrong CD, and he looked at the thing. He goes, "You have these songs already." I said, "I don't have Louis Armstrong's versions." I said, "Yeah, this is Pennies from Heaven and Red Red Robin." I said, "But I don't have his versions, and they're going to be very different, and they're going to be him, they're going to have a different interpretation." And that's the great part about American music in particular, that the idea that you can impose your voice on something that's already written.
Well, the thing that a lot of people don't understand is that the standards, the American Songbook or real book tunes, are merely templates. Once you get past the melody, that song no longer exists. It's you. Right. When I taught the ensemble class, I started with simple tunes, of course, and I used Take the A Train. Right? Everyone knows Take the A Train.
Billy Strayhorn.
I said, fine, we're going to play it as a samba now, and they looked at me. So I was playing at the time when I didn't have a bass player when I first started. So I was playing. So I'm going doom 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 doom. Right. The horn player kept trying to fit the Ellingtonian, ba ba dee ba 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 da into the samba. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm playing A Train." I said, "No, you're playing a samba. A Train is done. We're playing a samba." And he looked at me. I said, "You don't have to force fit stuff. It's you. Once it's time for you to do your improvisation, one of my favorite lines is a book that I have on jazz. In jazz or improvisatory music, the player is more important than the music.
Right.
If you were going
the storyteller is more important than the story.
Right. They don't care. If you were going to out with a bunch of friends and you were going to hear some 70s music, right? Hang out with your friends. You want to hear the hits, right? You want to hear the hits, and you want to hear them as they were played, because that's what the music was. But if you're going to see a jazz or any kind of improvisational music, I'll use that term in a general term. It doesn't matter what you're playing; it's what you say over it. Right. You could play the most worn out, bad wedding jazz tunes ever, and play them beautifully, and they'll be just as if they were original tunes.
Right.
Because it's what you say to it, what you're saying on it.
Right.
How you reharmonize it, how you bring it across, where you go with it. That's all that's important. And that's why I love when I hear stuff like Ornette Coleman with harmonics. It takes it to the next level. Because in harmonics, everybody solos and nobody solos at the same time. It's an amazing concept.
Well, explain that a little bit.
Okay, so in standard jazz playing, okay, you play the head
and everybody
solo, right? And everybody solos. You play the head now. What happened was two things happened as we come into the 60s. People were getting tired of bebop because it was so many chords and so restrictive. So that's when we got into the advent of modal music with Kind of Blue, right?
With Miles Davis, yeah.
Right, which came in with as much consternation as praise. Some people felt he was selling out. Other people realized what he was trying to do, that was lowering the amount of harmony so you can maximize what you do with it.
One of the greatest albums ever, by the way.
It still outsells every jazz album ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just read a book on how it was made and what he did. Amazing. What he was thinking, is just amazing. Then after a while, they said, okay, we're going to go farther. Actually, this happened in classical music, 100 years before. They said, okay, we're tired. We want to go less harmony until it came into free jazz. But what Ornette said was like, I'm tired of the head solo, solo, solo head. It's boring. Every tune is the same. You play your solo, right? So he said, let's talk about harmonics. And actually, harmonics was a mixture of music and sociology. He looked at it in the same realm as he did with the civil rights movement, equality. He said, if two players play a C note, they're not the same because they come from different places, different thought processes. So what happens is when you solo, it's a constant conversation. So if I'm soloing, if I'm blowing my solo, the horn player's answering me. Similar to if you listen to early jazz when they had the obligatos. You know, a guy's playing and the guy's underneath him, right? Yeah. Obligatos, excuse me. I always say that wrong.
Yeah.
It's that way, but it's not as structured. Right. All right. I've played many harmonic sessions, and when they're done right, they're exhausting, but they're unbelievably inspiring because the music is constantly changing. You know, sometimes there's a format, a structure, sometimes there isn't. But it's total open your ears and hear what's going on. I've done it in ensembles with 4 bass players. I've done it in ensembles with like huge amounts of players, and some ensembles when there's only 2. And I actually toured Europe twice with me and a vocalist. Mm-hmm. Actually, Lauren, who you know, we toured twice doing that. Right. And when it's done right, it's amazing. It's difficult to understand sometimes and can be a little cacophonous if it's not thought right, but it really forces you to open up. Your knowledge of improvisation becomes that much harder because you have less to work with and more to work with at the same time.
There you go. Now, do you prefer, I imagine you're going to say both. Do you prefer electric bass or upright bass?
It's like saying
who's your favorite kid?
Favorite child, yeah. Luckily, I have one of each, so I call one my favorite son and one my favorite daughter. So it makes it easier. I like them both, all right, and I like them both in different places, all right. In this, I'm preparing an album, hopefully to be recorded this year. You know, COVID notwithstanding, and I'm going to be playing both on it. And all it is when I write a tune, it's when I feel is appropriate. They have a place. I don't necessarily have that feeling that jazz can only be played on upright or stuff like that. I played it on both. I like playing jazz on the upright. You know, to me to me gear is a tool. Some people put a lot of like sentimental value on stuff. I don't have any sentimental value. They're tools. So whatever tool works is a tool I use.
You ever use the bow on your?
Right here.
There you go.
One of my teachers was Lynn Christie, who was an amazing player. He played both classical and he played jazz. He was trained in both, and he soloed using the bow, and he taught me how to solo using the bow. And it's a lot of fun because it's a different texture. Yeah.
And you could probably get real pretty on a ballad too with that too. You know,
the beauty of the bow to me is the vibrato and the long notes. That pizzicato, you can't really get the same feel. Right. So to me, it's what I'm feeling and what I want to say. When I jump to the bow is when I want to do it. If you know what I mean, if that makes sense.
What are do you listen to new jazz people? Who do you think's good now? I sometimes find it difficult to find newer people that are as exciting to me as the older people.
I find a lot of the newer stuff, and maybe I'm sounding like an old man here, is a little bit too much copying of the older stuff. When I come up was in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was, you know, during the neo-bop era when Wynton was big, and it was a lot of the, you know, everything has to be the way it was, you can't do anything new kind of thing. I'm hearing more and more of that now with newer players. I've yet to really hear anybody brand new that I really care, that I'm not saying I really care for, that I'm really interested in.
It sometimes makes me wonder if there is anything new left in jazz, you know, because it really, I understand what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying, that a lot of times you hear stuff that you go, that's nice, but I remember it, you know.
Yeah. Well, where a lot of the stuff is happening is in the freer jazz stuff. You know, if you listen to any of the freer music that has come out, I do a lot of work in the, I hate to use the word avant-garde, but a lot of the avant-garde stuff in Brooklyn, which is different, and it's a little self-indulgent at times, but it's interesting, at least as a performer. It's moving things forward. Whether it's a good place or a bad place is your opinion. The problem is that when people think of jazz, they think of the older stuff and think that that's got to stay there. You know, I've heard the word. If I hear the word tradition again, I'm going to scream.
Well, they think of it.
To me, tradition is peer pressure from dead people.
They think of it in the time when it was most popular. Like, it's not a popular music anymore. You know what I mean? And it really wasn't. I don't think it was a popular music after the big bands. Really, even bop became
right. Bop was not popular. In fact, you
couldn't dance to it. You know.
No, the Charlie Parker with strings was probably the one, and also what do you call it? Dave Brubeck's album was very popular, and he got a lot of crap for that. He was considered a sellout because he was popular.
And I was going to ask you, do you feel like Paul Chambers and those dudes?
Oh yeah, yeah.
But
Paul Chambers was a big influence. And actually, we talk about younger. He's not younger, but there's a bass player, New York guy, Peter Washington. Great bass player. He's a New York guy. I just love his tone. You know, he's not a super chop guy, whatever, but he gets the job done, and I love listening to him.
When these new types of styles come out, people have to write about it, and they have to categorize it, and they have to make it seem so different. I think looking back, I see more of a connection with all of the different styles than I see separation.
Absolutely, it's evolution.
Like Parker is always thought of as so different from the swing people. But if you listen to how he evolved, I mean, he didn't live very long, but if you listen to how he evolved, first of all, he could play blues like crazy, like really, really beautiful blues. He has some of the most beautiful tones in blues. And he could swing the hell out of a tune in a boppish way, but he's still swinging it. I don't see that much of a difference. But at the time, it was seen as such a difference. And then the old guard and the new guard had to insult each other and not like each other. But they wound up being more alike than different, I think.
Right. One of the classic ones, there's a great book on jazz theory that I talk about all the time. It's the Jazz Theory book by Mark Levine, who's a piano player. And it's probably the best text on jazz harmony I've ever heard, because it's very well laid out and in clear language with lots of examples. And he talks about one of the concepts that the bop guys did is they took major chords, and when they soloed, they added the sharp 11. So if you were soloing over a C7 or a C major 7, you would add an F sharp instead of an F. Back then, they called it the flat fives. When they started it, the critics lost their minds. They said jazz is dead. They're ruining the art form. It was just an evolution of harmony. Right. You know, it wasn't like they were like, you know, killing goats on stage. I mean, it was just a different harmonic concept. But it was enough for, you know, it was enough to cause an uproar. You know, but and then as jazz went farther, and you get the stuff like Ornette or even Train. You know, look at the career of Train. He came in, oh my God, he's amazing, he's fantastic, and then he starts doing gigs where he's getting booed. Half the people are leaving in the middle of he's already a superstar, and then he has to do duet albums to make people realize that he can still play traditional jazz. He did, you know, with Coleman Hawkins, with Johnny Hartman, with Duke Ellington, which are amazing records.
The Ellington album
by his management
really
to prove to, the Ellington and the Johnny Hartman one. Some people consider the finest jazz album of all time.
Yeah.
They did those to show that hey, he can still play, you know, regular jazz. Mm-hmm. So he's moving forward, man. Whether you like it or not doesn't become the issue.
There's another fellow who didn't live that long. It's interesing how a lot of these guys don't.
Well, he had lung problems,
and a lot of the jazz guitarists didn't live long at all. You know, one of my favorite musicians.
In the case,
go ahead. Go
Well,
ahead.
I'm just saying some of it was drug related, like Charlie Parker. Some of it was just
Lifestyle.
the time with cancer and stuff. Like Booker Little. Booker Little died at 23 of kidney disease. He was a leader at 19, and at 23 he died. Now I think that was 1961. Now if that was now, would that have been something they would have found? I don't know.
And Charlie Christian died of
Some of this stuff was
tuberculosis.
just
Charlie Christian died of tuberculosis. Eddie Lang. I don't know. Do you know Eddie Lang?
how many people do you know die of tuberculosis now?
Nobody. Do you know Eddie Lang, the jazz guitarist from the 20s? Eddie Lang. Do you know Eddie? So Eddie Lang died of a tonsillectomy. He never woke up from the anesthesia. It's crazy.
So some of it is just the times.
Yeah. Right.
Some of it is just the times. You look at like a musician or actor, in the 40s or 50s, and they're 40 years old. They look like they're 70 because lifestyles were different.
Yeah. Yeah. And just the things like, if I remember reading an old interview with Jack Teagarden, and he talked about how playing on the horn ruined his teeth. His teeth were falling out. Well, that doesn't happen now. It was probably he wasn't taking very good care of his teeth.
Right, and people smoked like chimneys, and if you look at the one thing that's amazing about old movies is that
smoking all the time.
People smoked everywhere.
Yeah.
I was watching an old B grade sci-fi film because that's one of the things I like to watch, and they're on a spaceship, and and not only are they smoking, but they have. At one point, they open a cabinet and there's like 50 cartons of cigarettes. It's like, what? So, it was a different lifestyle. My father smoked. My father at one point was smoking almost 3 packs a day.
What was his brand?
He started with Parliament, and then he went to Marlboro.
Marlboro, yeah.
But I remember, it was different lifestyles. I hardly know anybody that smokes anymore. None of my children's friends smoke ever.
Right. What was I going to say to you? So if you had to pick one jazz album that you had to say, start here with somebody, what would you say?
Kind of Blue. I use it all the time.
Okay, so Kind of Blue. So Kind of Blue, you have
because
Miles Davis, and isn't Coltrane on Kind of Blue? He's the saxophonist on Kind of Blue. Yeah.
The beauty of that album is a couple of things. First of all, most of the tunes are simple harmonically. They're blues tunes, or like So What's, like 2 chords, right? So if someone's not used to jazz, they're used to blues. Like with Freddie Freeloader is the one I always start with. It's a blues with one different chord. The last chord, instead of going back to the tonic, goes to the 7, right? The flat 7 dominant. And so everybody can follow that for the most part. The 4 soloists, even from a dead beginner, you can hear how different they are.
From each other, yes.
Right. So I'm saying, it's taking a simple tune and realizing that there's no one way to do it.
Yeah. And
all 4 of them.
It's a conversation. It's
but it's radically different.
Yeah.
Each one of them is radically different. So there's no one way to solo over this stuff. Improvisation does, there are guidelines I talked about, right? There are certain guidelines I start students with. But after a while, it's like, I remember I tell them, I said, there comes a point where you can look at me and say, this is none of your damn business. Because with the exception of the tools that I can give you in guidelines, after a while, it's none of my business how you solo. I had a student, he's a friend of mine now. He is a mainstay in the hard rock community downtown. I'm talking like, hard music. And I had him soloing here, pre-COVID, of course. His solos were naturally more aggressive than mine were.
Because of the rock, yeah, right.
But is it wrong?
Wrong is an abstract idea.
If he walked into the blue note and started soloing that way, yeah, they'd give him crap. But from an artistic point of view, is it wrong? Absolutely not.
Right. But he appreciates jazz.
Yeah.
I knew a lot of rockers, and I was always a jazz guy, even in high school, which made me not so popular in high school in the 90s, because I was a jazz guy, from way back. But everybody was into like, Megadeth and things like that, and stuff like that, or Aerosmith and all that stuff. And maybe now as they got older they would appreciate it, but at the time they thought I was like a wimp for liking those things.
Okay, here's the thing. First of all, I'm a metalhead. I started in metal. and I still listen to metal. I listen to all kinds of music, but it's where I started, and it's still a part of my life. I think it's cool. I drive my family crazy because I'll listen to Charlie Parker 1 minute, and then I'll listen to Arch Enemy next minute, and they're like, "What is your problem?" It's just I welcome different forms of music. Secondly, I have found since the birth of the internet, musicians are much more open-minded
because you can get everything.
Right, because if you're a jazz guy and you heard about this new band Megadeth, say back in the day, you would have to either borrow a record or go buy one.
Right.
So now all you have to do is, so you can listen. So there's a wider availability. I remember trying to teach some of the hair band guys in the 80s about clave. They looked at me and said, "What are you talking about?" Now, if I talk about it, they can go listen to it. Plus, there are bands now, hard rock bands, that are educated, and you'll hear jazz in the middle of them. You'll hear clave in the middle of them. There's a band out of the Ukraine called Ginger. They'll start with like a reggae groove and then go into the hard. So the musicians themselves are more diverse because it's easier to be more diverse now.
The accessibility of different types of music is better now. Like I remember when I also in high school, when I was getting into jazz, I really got into the music of Bing Crosby, and knowing that he was actually not just a Christmas singer, but that he was a jazz singer from the 20s.
Right.
Cat and everything like that. Well, finding like Bing Crosby stuff, like a lot of stuff, because he's the most recorded person of all time, like 2,600 recordings. But you can't find, when you were going to record stores, you'd find Swinging on a Star and White Christmas, all you'd find are those things. Now with the internet, there are things I'm still discovering new stuff of his where I'm going, what? He recorded that in 1933? He recorded Can't We Be Friends? He recorded Just Friends? I didn't know that, or his 1931 recording with Ellington's band, St. Louis Blues. I mean, you could find these things now. And I find that more people know what I'm talking about when I bring it up now, and it's because of the internet. Yeah.
When I found out, I remember I was listening to some back in the day. I was listening to one radio station, and they were talking about Nat King Cole. Now I know Nat King Cole from the Christmas album growing up, and then when I heard that he had his own band, and I started to listen. He's easily my favorite piano player.
Oh, that's what people forget, because he's such a popular singer in everyone's imagination. He is one of the best jazz piano players of all time. His trio is great. And I think they invented that no drums, just the bass, the guitar, and the piano.
Yeah, you didn't hear a lot of it because you didn't hear a lot of it because he had an integrated band and nobody would hire them.
Yeah. But
and that was a no-no. Integrated bands were a no-no. But like, what amazed me is I remember seeing a documentary on him, and what I loved about it is that his playing was effortless. I mean, he'd be playing his ass off, but he'd be effortless. And they said that there was a jam session somewhere where Bud Powell was running, and nobody went near Bud Powell because he was the Eddie Van Halen of his day, right? Nat King Cole would go up, no problem, and he would play. He wasn't intimidated at all, and he would play. And I didn't know. I knew, chestnuts roasting on an open fire as a kid. I didn't know about, I remember getting a Horace Silver album and seeing, and Chuck Mangione was on it. Now I know Chuck Mangione from, That Feels So Good, which unfortunately I don't like the tune, but he was playing straight ahead, which makes sense. It's where he started, but you don't know this stuff. Chuck Mangione, I listened to the track about 4 times. Yeah. That makes you like, wow,
Well, I mean, to get back to what you said, my favorite stuff to listen to of Nat Cole is his stuff with his group, as opposed to the Capitol Records pop tunes. I like those.
If you've ever seen any of his show, when he plays on his show,
his television show, he's amazing. There's a clip, a great clip with him playing with a 10-year-old Billy Preston on his show, and Billy Preston's 10 years old, and they take turns on Blueberry Hill, I think it is, going back.
Billy was nuts. Billy was amazingly talented.
Yeah.
Amazingly talented.
What did you think of this new Beatles 6-hour documentary? Did you see it?
No, I didn't. I was busy.
It was good. It didn't need to be 6 hours, but it was good. You can't help it.
I have a problem, and maybe this will get me in trouble. I have a problem with idolization.
Yeah. I
mean, the Beatles are good. Don't get me wrong.
Right, but they're not but they're not the be-all, end-all of everything.
But nobody is.
Right.
It's just a step. I mean, there are people that made you want to do what you do. There are people that made you want to do what I do. But, like I said, there are some players I see on social media, they sound so much like them. I said, is the guy sick? Are you taking over his gig? What the hell?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, and the other thing is that I like to discover the people I wasn't paying attention to. That's my favorite stuff. Like people sometimes think of me as just liking Crosby, Sinatra, and all that stuff. But then I'll tell people, no, you got to listen to Hank Williams. And they're like, Hank Williams. I'm like, Hank Williams is amazing. You got to listen to Bob Wills band. You got to listen to those country bands. I said, first of all, they could swing the hell out of things and they knew the blues and they were great. The songs were great stories and all that stuff. And people go, oh, country. I hate country. It's like, listen to it. Listen to it. You're going to like
Well, just like, but I read a very interesting article about the movement of music. And what happens is that something new comes in. Whether it be jazz or bebop or disco or grunge, whatever you want to talk. And oh wow, it's really cool. So everybody starts getting on the
bandwagon,
right? And then eventually it becomes a parody of itself.
Yes,
right.
Of course.
I always tell people, I said there was the part where Charlie was an idiot growing up and saying disco was horrible and didn't realize that there were some great musicians, especially bass players, right? But what happens? You get this like funky soul thing that's going on, and then you get disco duck, right? And then things fall apart. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's the same way. Fusion comes along. It's a real interesting, and eventually it just guys playing unison lines at 300 miles an hour. There's no music, right? That kind of stuff. And so the thing is that I think Anthony Braxton said it the best. There's three kinds of people: the people that invent something new, the people that take that new thing and run with it, do nothing with it but profit over it. And then there's the people who said, anything old is the only thing that's any good. It's like, right? So it's understanding that music moves forward, but after a while, it exhausts itself.
Yes, it can exhaust.
And you can say that in any genre.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm being jazz centric with you. So I wanted to ask you, and I know you might not want to be negative, but tell me most overrated album. I'll tell you mine. That everybody says is great, and I'm like, it's okay. And I'm going to tell you mine. Mine's sort of a pop album, but it has jazz people in it. But if you want me to go first, I'll go first.
Go ahead.
I am not a fan of the duet albums with Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald.
Really?
No. I love him, and I like her when she does interesting things. I don't think she's that interesting as an interpreter of lyrics, so she doesn't make me feel anything. And also those albums are done in her key, so Armstrong is singing awkwardly and half talking and stuff, and they're very long. Like the songs will be 5 minutes for no reason, and I think it's with the Oscar Peterson group, and some people love that. And I know it's like sacrilegious to say anything bad about Ella Fitzgerald. I love Ella Fitzgerald, but she's not my favorite. And I'm not crazy about those albums. My favorite duets with Armstrong are the ones he did with Bing, actually, but overrated. That would be mine.
The problem is before I give my answer, because I have to think about it. So I'm going to stall. The thing I tell students all the time is you don't have to like what everybody likes. As a bass player, everybody idols Jaco Pastorius. Mm-hmm. There's no requirement that you have to like him. You don't have to sit there and badmouth him. But if you don't like what he does, the world isn't going to end. We need people who like him and don't like him, because then we get diversity. Right. Yeah, you could like Ray Brown, you can hate Ray Brown. I don't care. Like I said, don't be a jerk about it, right?
Well, but it would be hard to not like Ray Brown, but okay.
Right, but you know what I'm saying. You can say, well, I don't care what he does here, I don't care what he does there, that kind of thing.
Right.
I'm going to be a little more contemporary, because I guess it's in my head. Is the Tony Bennett, Lady Gaga albums? I think are really awful. She's a very talented player. Can't swing to save her life.
You don't like the way she swings, yeah?
No, she doesn't. She
doesn't swing. She's a theater singer. Like she sings.
I think she's amazingly talented and an amazing individual.
She's singing it like it's a musical theater piece. Not right, like
if you listen, I think the one I actually pointed out to my daughter, because my daughter sings, not professionally, she sings for fun. And if you listen to Lady's a Tramp, Tony's going ba da dee da 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 dee da da da. She goes ba da dee da 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 dee da da. She's belting it, like you said, and I think she's amazing. If you can find out, she actually did a gig, a tune with Metallica, and she did it amazingly. She kept right up with them, right? So she's talented, but she can't swing. And it's the same thing if you listen to who's the other guy that did the stuff. I'm blanking, but all these some of these other guys that, huh?
I know. I bet you I know who you're thinking of. Elvis Costello.
No, not Elvis. No, Elvis. I don't. No, not that one. I'm thinking of he did them like 10 years ago.
I know who you're talking. Rod Stewart.
Yeah. It's like,
yeah.
I mean, I love him, but he can't swing.
Well, I wasn't crazy about Paul McCartney made a jazz album with, and I wasn't crazy about I don't think he's as fantastic a singer as some people think he is.
One of the biggest problems I have with jazz, teaching jazz to players, especially bass players, is the feel. The feel is different from a rock perspective, right? And like if you listen to, like, I always use the term. I don't know if you're familiar with the bass player Duck Dunn. He was a big studio guy. Did all the R&B, a lot of R&B and soul stuff back in the day. If you listen to rock swing versus jazz swing, they're different.
Yeah.
And so when rock swing, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Which is rock, right? And jazz is 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
Getting that swing is a hard thing, especially the bass players, because we love the downbeat so much, right?
Right.
And if you don't have that swing, it doesn't move.
Yeah.
It doesn't do what it's got to do.
Yeah. And I don't know if you would develop it, like we were talking about Lady Gaga. I don't know if she'll become better later on. She is relatively young for someone to approach that material, because that material seems simple, and it's like, I kind of describe it as a martini, because a martini's ingredients are very simple, but it's so easy to mess up a martini.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just gin and vermouth, but if you don't mix it just right, it's bad.
The problem is this. It's I always tease people that, my generation learned of classical music from Bugs Bunny.
Yes. Oh, yes. Good. We're going to have to talk about it. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I was, and jazz too, when you think about it. I was showing a student, when the Little Red Riding Hood goes, the 5 o'clock whistles on the blink.
That's a song.
That's a real song.
That was a popular song.
When Bugs Bunny plays the piano with Yosemite Sam and it blows up, that's a real song. Dun 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 dun.
Endearing Old Charms. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what happens is that a lot of people's first influence into jazz, introduction into jazz, is either cartoons, right?
Yeah.
Bad wedding music.
Yeah.
Right. Or vibes from jazz players. I have an acquaintance, a Facebook friend in England, and I'm sorry, in Australia, excuse me. He says that the real jazz guys don't get any work because they've got so much attitude that no one will work with them. So sometimes you get involved, like I said, when I was up in the neobop era, if you show up with a at the time the real book, they wouldn't let you play. If you didn't have an upright, wouldn't let you play. Where a jam session is supposed to be a community thing.
They were snobby. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I've run jam sessions, I've run a couple of jam sessions. If someone's playing bass, right, and if I hear that they're getting lost, I'll jump underneath them and just like point on the chart and crawl back out. Because the whole idea is for them to play. I mean, part of it is selfish. If people feel comfortable, they'll come and I'll get paid.
Yeah.
Right. But the whole idea is that the only way that the art will get forward is by teaching people the art, not by vibing them out.
Now, do you think, I don't know how to put this right, and maybe I'm not putting it right, but do you think that it's something you have to learn and know, and then sort of when you're doing it, forget and just be? Do you know what I mean? Like there's if you're overthinking it, you're probably going to make more mistakes than if you just get into that. The way I use it when I teach is that if you and I were at dinner with a bunch of people, right? And I said, Charlie, did you see the new Spider-Man movie? Now you're going to have an answer,
You're gonna form your answer using the rules of the English language, if we're speaking English, and you're gonna tell me, right?
But you're not
First
going
of
to
all,
be
you don't
thinking about it. Right.
You're not gonna have a prepared statement,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Or you're not gonna say, I did see it, I do see it. You're not going to be conjugating verbs. You've done that already. So yes, you forget. For me, you forget and you don't forget. One of the things I teach, I was again taught by Billy, was the concept of the dude in your head. It's an ear training exercise where someone in your head is helping you translate your ideas. So you're thinking in the way of saying like, I want to do this, I'm going to do that, but it's in the context of, like you said, the performance idea where you're not breaking it apart, but you're using what you've learned.
Yeah. Now, a lot of musicians are not live players, and being a live player, you could have stage fright. You could have those things, you know. Do you ever encounter that with anybody who you work with, and then when you finally work with them live, you see that they maybe are a little more trepidatious when they're in front of a crowd?
Not as of late, but the story I ever tell is probably one of the low points of my career. I got a call from a guy up in Westchester. He said, we got this guy, Hollywood Joe. He's a great player. He's an amazing guitar player. Yeah, right away when I got that name, I should have thought, but I needed the work. He said, we're going to do this gig and blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. So I learn his music, and it's all like Elvish-ish kind of stuff, which is fine. I'm good with it. We get up there. He's like known. Everybody knows him. Okay, fine. I go to play. He plays the whole gig, staring at his amp like this.
He's not engaging in the audience.
And he froze.
Yeah.
And it was one of the few times that I don't do this. I got off stage. I handed my bass to my wife, grabbed the beer, and got destroyed. It was a real low point.
Was he just a studio guy? Is that why? Was he not a live?
I have no idea. From what I understood, he was like a legend. You know, maybe in his own mind, I don't know, but it was a horrible thing. It was a horrible day.
There are people who are all studio, and they're not live players. And
I more find players that are stiff, more stiff up front, whether it be physically or musically.
Yeah.
You know, but no, as of late, I've been privileged, you know, knock on wood. I've been privileged. I'm working with good players and players that are actually the direct opposite. Case in point, I have my own group that I'm working with, and we did a performance it was only a trio setting, but I did a performance at the World Trade Center festival that they used to have, and was me and two other players. And I gave them the charts, and we did 1-2. I was paying them because I firmly believe that. All I could afford was 1 2-hour rehearsal before we did the gig. It was probably 8 tunes. And it's on my website. They killed it. Just killed it. I mean, you could see the look on my face. It was exactly what was in my twisted head came out, at least in the trio setting, you know. So I've been lucky out here doing the opposite has been happening.
Yeah, well, because you mentioned Cecil McBee before. He's mostly a studio guy, isn't he?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you know his wife, by the way?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen her in years, but if you ever run into him, say hello to his wife for me, and if you ever run into his wife, mention my name, and she'll know who I am.
Yeah. The thing about all of that is, a wise man once said, "You go through the door that's open." And you know, and if you end up doing studio work or live work, or in my case, an educator, you go where it goes, man.
Well, there's nothing. You can't knock studio stuff. Some of the best jazz is stuff that was done in a studio. The Hot Fives and the Hot Sevens were just studio stuff. That band didn't exist in a live setting. Those people together, you know.
Once you got past the big bands, there were fewer and fewer working bands. You know, Charlie Parker had, you know, the golden era bebop 5, but after that it was, you know, whoever they got. You know, right. That's what's the beauty of jazz, is that you could have an album of, you know, Charles Goonan, and there'll be like 10 songs, and there'll be 8 different band, groups.
Eight different company. Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's sometimes that was contractual. Sometimes 5 tunes were done on one day and 6 tunes were done on another day or whatever. But it's different players.
But then eventually there became really great live jazz albums. Like Sonny Rollins is great live. I mean, he did studio stuff, but his live stuff is just like
what I love about Sonny Rollins. What I love about Sonny Rollins is that I tell people I feel he made his records just so I could teach, because some of his stuff is and like, for instance, if you listen to like his 1949 Stockholm album, there's no chordal instrument. Right? It's just him, bass player, and a drummer, and it's live. It's done. It was done. I think it was done over the radio, I think. But it's wonderful because you hear where he's going, but there's no chordal instrument under him, so he's almost unencumbered. He's still tonal, but it's amazing. It's amazing.
He's one of the only guys a jazz musician who's still around, and he's like, what is he, 90 now or something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, he still exists.
Some of his albums, like Saxophone Colossus, is another album that's probably the second album I tell people.
But that's a studio album,
right? But I'm just saying, his I was going into his ideas. I apologize, but his ideas, you hear, some of the live albums get a little ugly. One of the things I talk about is jazz evolving is if you listen to Kind of Blue, which if you listen to So What. And then you listen to Kind of Blue from live at the Plug Nickel.
Yeah,
it's 6 years later, different group, but the music, the song is the whole format of performance is totally different. Of course, Plug Nickel is live, but the whole approach to jazz is totally different.
Yeah.
So sometimes live brings that out. We're doing something different. We're doing something different. We're doing something different. Oh my God, it's really different.
Yeah. And it could also get carried away. Like you were saying earlier, that sometimes you could be like, this solo is great, but now it's starting to sound like it's on too long. You ever hear one of those feelings where you go, this is because I'm not saying this about Sonny Rollins, but Sonny Rollins will have like a 9 minute or 19 minute piece because he's doing like a crazy solo, and very few people could get away with that. You got to be as good as Sonny Rollins, really.
I heard an interview with Marion McPartland once, and she said there have been times in her career when she felt later on that she maybe played one chorus too many.
She was great for the interviews and for bringing people on that show where she would.
I used to listen to that religiously.
Yeah, and desperate people, like different people that you wouldn't even like. I mean, I heard she had Willie Nelson on the show. She had Stephen Sondheim on the show. Like people you wouldn't even think belong on piano jazz, but she had all those great and what was it? It was Jimmy McPartland was her husband. Yeah, so you had
he played piano as well, I believe.
Yeah, those are all those Chicago guys, those white jazz musicians, the Chicago guys. There's a lot of great. Were you ever a fan of Eddie Condon?
Not a huge fan. I know some of his stuff, but I'm not. My interest and expertise kind of is like from bebop forward because that's where I was taught. I listened to some of the early stuff as well. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not as I understand it. I've studied it, but a lot of my listening kind of goes from like Coleman Hawkins forward.
Okay, but he's at least started in the 30s. Okay, then let's give you somebody else. Art Blakey.
Oh yeah, what I like about Art Blakey was he was a great and actually Carmen McRae as well. They were bands that were farm teams. A lot of the newer players they looked for newer players.
Yeah,
and absolutely. So you would hear an early whoever, right? And that was really cool. I love Art Blakey stuff.
I even think Wynton Marsalis started out in a version of Art Blakey.
Yes, I was going to say that. Yes.
Yeah, and the Art Blakey stuff is great. Oh yeah, and those are the unsung drummers that people don't remember as much anymore. There's a very few. There's like who do they remember? They remember the swing drummers like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich. They remember Max Roach later on, but Art Blakey and his band. I mean, there were so many great drummers too. The drummers always get sort of short shrift, I think.
Yeah, well, bass players don't do too well. I can't tell you how many times when I was doing the club day thing when my kids were small, I would do a wedding or a club, and I would go to get a club soda because I don't drink when I play, and $2 with the band.
And they didn't believe
and
you.
Next set, $2. Oh, I'm with the band. I'm the bass player and I'm in the back.
Right. Yeah, the bass players don't get that much. It's usually the trumpeter, the piano player. Even nowadays, I don't think there's many trombonists anymore, but they used to be big. And it's the saxophonists and the trumpeters and the singers.
One of the Marsalis brothers is a trombone player. I forget which one. One of the younger ones. And Wynton and Branford used to give him crap about it. Why'd you pick that stupid instrument?
Yeah, because it's almost, you don't hear of any great trombonists anymore. And in fact, are there any great bop trombonists? I can't even think of it.
J.G. Johnson, Curtis Fuller.
Okay,
are the two that I think about. J.G. Johnson, of course, because he was a real choppy player.
Yeah.
Like I said, Curtis Fuller's another one that I liked.
Because they all flourished in the generations before that. My favorite is Teagarden. I think that he could.
Right, I was going to say Teagarden.
Blues on that trombone, amazing.
You have to understand. We were talking about the evolution of music again. We had the big bands, right? And the big bands were profitable and interesting and everything. But because it was a big band, you could have John Q. horn player, make a living
and never know
playing his. But playing his part and just playing his part, maybe once in a while doing a little solo, but playing his part and you're cool. Suddenly that became not profitable. So then they started going into small groups. So all of a sudden, John Q. horn player, now maybe one of two horn players, or he or she would be the only, or he, back then it would mainly be he, but it would be only one. Now they have to worry about melody and solos. All of a sudden they have to know more about what's going on.
They have to be better.
And as the music started changing into bop, it was scaring the hell out of them. One of my favorite stories is, you remember Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood?
Sure.
The guy that played piano was an amazing piano player. When my son would watch it, I would come in the last 5 minutes because when the credits were playing, he would play with a trio and the band was smoking. Yeah. Smoking. But one of the characters, I think the guy who ran the music store was a guitar player. And he used to play in the big bands. And he was on WKCR on an interview years ago. And he talked about when he was touring with this big band, I forgot which one he was with, on Sundays was their day off. Whatever town they were in, they would go into a record store, get a record, and play it during their dinner. That was their tradition. So one day, somebody came in and had Dizzy Gillespie's Groovin' High.
Okay.
Put it on. And he said the whole band looked at each other and said, we got to find another line of work. They had no idea what was going on. They were absolutely, he says, eventually we figured out. But said that day we were like, we're done. Because it was so different.
Dizzy's a guy.
Group, so you can't hide.
Dizzy's a guy who I don't think he gets enough attention now. I think he's sort of forgotten since he died.
Yeah, well, the thing about Dizzy, what I like about him is Charlie Parker was a genius, but he wasn't
intellectual
necessarily. I'm sorry?
He wasn't intellectual. Dizzy was actually intellectual about music.
They said Dizzy would go to the chalkboard or whiteboard and tell you exactly what he's doing or why he's doing it. And we need people to do that because at least it gives people. I always tell people it's the example problem in the beginning of the math book. It gives you an idea of, okay, this is a good place to start.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, just play. Because I always people say, oh, jazz, anything fits.
That's not true.
Well, yes, it is.
Well, but
anything
you know what
fits.
I mean.
Anything fits if you know what you're doing.
Okay.
A 5-star chef, you hand a 5-star chef a chicken. He or she is going to be able to do things that you or I couldn't even dream of doing because they've had the background and the understanding, and they can take the chances.
Well, that's the thing. It's anything fits because they've been doing it enough to know what to do with it. You know what I mean?
Well, they know why it fits and they know where to put it. That's what I'm saying. So what happens is, anything fits. Well, yes and no. Again, going back to the 5-star chef, the 5-star chef can put snails in ice cream and you could eat it. Because they know what to do.
Right. Right, right.
You know, you and I would do it. It would taste like snail ice cream.
The snail ice cream sounds delicious. No, but yeah, Dizzy and Dizzy stuff got. He did so much more. He lived so much longer than Charlie Parker. His music lasted so much longer. To listen to his stuff, to just think of him from the time of Bop is sort of unfair because he kept doing stuff. He did a great album of Irving Berlin songs. And I first I was like, Dizzy Gillespie's gonna play like Sweet, and I was like, I was almost in tears listening to his version of Always. I was like, wow, like
Yeah, because he moved forward. It's like, okay, Bop is over. What do I do now?
yeah,
But it's just like some of the guys, especially bass players I talk to that are still in the fusion vibe. It's like, dude, it's not 1978. I mean, I'm not saying you can't you can do something like that, but stop, that was a great time, but it's 2022.
yeah,
You have to move your art. He was a Bop guy, but he moved his art.
yeah,
That's the whole idea.
right.
And sometimes it's popular and sometimes it's not.
That's definitely true. Why do you think that jazz still is more popular overseas? I have a theory why it's not popular here. And I think it's just because Americans don't appreciate their recent past. They're always about what's next anyway.
Yeah, but I also notice in other countries, and because I have friends in other countries, art is part of the society. You know what I'm saying? In other words, you have, infrastructure, you have, welfare, you have all of the services that are in art in life, right? But then art is part of that. Art is part of the governmental network.
Yeah.
There are people that can be artists and have avenues for grants, avenues to do things, and certain cultures understand that art makes your life better, whether you're performing it or appreciating it.
Right.
And it's part of the lifestyle. Art, art of whether it be sculpture or paintings or music or whatever, it's part of the lifestyle.
So therefore, then the artist would be more appreciated as a profession there.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm going to be candid. My parents were ashamed that I was a musician.
Right. Yeah.
Because I wasn't a doctor or a lawyer.
Right.
That right there. That's it. Right. Art is I think art is more prominent in other countries.
Yeah, it's true. It is true. Now, okay, so we're going crazy with jazz. I could talk about jazz forever, but other than jazz, you said you were into metal, but what other music did you listen to growing up?
I was rock. I listened to the whole. I was a kid, so the whole whatever rock was popular in the day. From rock, I went into progressive rock, and I went into fusion, and then I went into jazz. That's where my head went.
And who was your favorite band growing up?
It started out with the Who. That was the first one. And then I was listening to like all the progressive ones like Rush and Yes and things like that. And then I went into, Return to Forever and Stanley Clarke and, Weather Report and that kind of stuff. And then when I started hearing jazz, I went into the fusion, into the less fusion, more jazz. And then I got into bop. And then from bop, I went from there and into the freer stuff because I found it interesting.
And you're a metal guy too.
Huh?
And you're a metal guy. You like metal too.
Yeah, I was kind of like peripheral as I was coming through it. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, like, what do you like? Faith No More and all that stuff. Do you like?
Well, I started out with Sabbath, as a kid, right?
Yeah.
That was big. Some of the hair stuff in the '80s, I listened to a little bit, and then some of the more for the stuff I listen to now is really different. Like some of the harder stuff, like Lamb of God and like this band Ginger and Arch Enemy, the real harder stuff because it's different. And it to me, it's like the palate cleanser. And then when I come back to what I'm doing, I'm clean and I can think of something else. Because I think if you stick in one genre, you get stale. And sometimes you got to move out and then come back in. That's why I love playing these two instruments because I can approach them differently.
So you said you're going to be recording an album where you're going to be doing both basses?
Yeah, it's actually going to be using my double bass. I'm going to be using the electric, and I also have I'm a Yamaha performance artist, and so I have the Yamaha silent bass, which is an electric upright. You'll see it on my website. It just different sounds and different applications.
And is this original tunes?
All original. I've written them, arranged them, the whole bit. It's all me.
And you write everything down, right?
Yeah.
Because you know that I write songs and stuff like that, and you saw my song and everything like that. I had to get someone to write that down for me, because
a lot of people. There's a big debate, especially in the bass community, about reading music and not reading music. Reading music is a skill.
Yeah.
Right? Just like painting the wall behind you. It's a skill.
Yes.
Whether you decide to do that or not do that is none of my business.
Mm-hmm.
When I teach music, I strongly recommend reading, right? To what extent depends on what you want to do. I've had students come to me saying, I want to go to music school in the fall. I hammer the crap out of them to learn how to read because the audition makes you read stuff, right?
Well, it would definitely be helpful for instrumentalists, especially if they want to work with any type of orchestra or something like that. Like,
right, I was just going to say,
I can't
if you
imagine
want to do an orchestra or a show.
You need
to learn how to read.
I can't imagine, like when we were talking about Bach or anything like that, with them doing it without writing it down, without being able to write that down. It's a little bit different than you take a guy like a songwriter like Irving Berlin, who couldn't read or write music, but was one of the most popular songwriters. It's a little bit different. It's more than a little bit different.
Right. But I get a lot of players that say, well, I'm not going to music school and I'm not working in an orchestra. Why do I need to learn how to read? And there's a couple of things I tell them. I don't force anybody to read. I strongly recommend it. I said, first of all, there's the whole communication part of it. I can give you something, you can give me something. Reading adds another sense to the learning process. Sight. When you can see the music as well as hear the music as well as feel the music, if I could get smell and taste into it, right, it would be even better. Right. Some things with reading, especially on stringed instruments, how you play them is important. So it teaches you economy of motion, which helps your playing. So it helps you, it rounds out another way of thinking of the music. So even if you're not going to be in an orchestra or whatever, it helps you in another way. Now, if you're going to be in an orchestra or go to music school, you might put a lot of time in reading. All the other players, they may put less time, but it still gives a benefit.
Yeah.
For me, I see things in my head in written. Like if I hear something, I think about it that way, and I can bring it to the board.
So you could hear something and then write it down in music.
Well, yeah, I don't have perfect pitch. I have strong relative pitch, but I don't have perfect pitch. But I at least can get the rhythm down and all that. Yeah, I know. But I do pretty well. I do pretty well that way. But it just, like if somebody says, can you play this? And it comes in I see it in my, at least the rhythm in my head, and then I can play it because I can visualize it. Whereas my grandfather used to say in his broken English, visualize.
Visualize. How many tunes are you going to do for this new album?
I think I have 8.
Are they instrumental or do they have words?
They're all instrumental, and it's kind of a mixed. It's kind of in the realm between standard jazz and free jazz. What I mean is that I wanted to be something that wasn't so out that it wasn't accessible to the average listener.
Right.
But I didn't want to do the same old, head solo, 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 head. So it's going to have a little bit of both. I use a lot of extended harmonies. There's going to be some harmonic play between the players. Some interesting horn parts in it. I think some good melodies. Some will be full orchestration. I've got one tune that's probably going to be either just me and a piano or me and a piano and a horn. I have another one that's going to be a quartet. So it kind of runs the thing. And I have trio settings of the basics of my tunes on my website, so you can see them when I did that festival. It shows a little bit of what I'm trying to do.
Do you work with a lot of the same guys again?
The piano player and the horn player, if I have anything to do with it, they will be with my band. I'm trying to find other players now. I haven't done it yet because with COVID, what am I going to say? Oh, I'll call you sooner or later. So I'm still kind of find people because I want to find them, get them together, and start working on it.
Are these pieces connected in a conceptual style? Like, did they go in an order?
No, each some of the songs do have concepts. I tell students because many students I work composition with, because as you learn music and you learn music holistically, you start wanting to create. And I tell them music is one of the few times where the cart before the horse works. Because you can write a tune based on words, some cool words from a cool melody, a cool chord progression, a concept, right? Any of that works for your starting point. Right. So some of the music started with an interesting melody that I wrote. Some of them worked with a concept that I was trying to put together. Right. Either structurally or harmonically, things like that. And then it worked from there.
What is the name of the whole album?
Fleck Refshin. What
did you call me?
It's a play on reflection.
Oh, Fleck Refshin. Okay. And what inspired you for that title?
One of the pieces I wrote involves a concept of what they call negative harmony, which is called inverse harmony, and that's where I got it from. It's kind of like the some of the music is a reflection of itself. Yeah,
I gotcha. All right,
and
cool.
the way the melody plays on one another is a very interesting thing, because it's almost like a call and response, but it's not a call and response.
Are you going to record it at the same place we recorded in Brooklyn, Peter's place?
I haven't decided yet. There's a couple of things I want to do. One of the problems I'm going to have is some of this music it's going to have a live feel to it, right? Because I'm trying not to do overdubs, so I have a live feel to it, even if I have a larger band. So I need to be I have to make sure that there are places where I can play and see everybody.
You mean that you're going to do it all the way through? That's what you mean, right? You're going to do
it. In other words, I'm going to play the tune everybody's playing, because in harmonic play you got to be there. Right. You can't do it as a at a later date. It's like you having it's like, say you recording a conversation between you and me, and then somebody overdubs like their responses to our conversation. It makes no sense.
Now, did you ever, I mean, obviously a lot of recording is done. You made me think about this. A lot of recording is done now in pieces. It's been like that for a long time. I mean, there are so many times where, like, the singer never saw the orchestra, or the horn part was put in later and stuff like that. But isn't it better to have them all together, even if it's the singer with the band? It's better to, I mean, I know that it's probably easier for the engineer, but it just seems like you're not going to get the right mood.
Yeah, it depends on the music, and it depends on what you're doing. That you're kind of talking, how you take your coffee. People think different things are easier.
Yes, I like to take my coffee that way. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and we could probably debate with producers ad infinitum on that. I just know from my record, I want to do it this way because of the way the feel I'm trying to get to it. And at least the two players that I have in the band already, I've done this kind of thing before, and usually amazingness happens.
Okay. Then that's why that's why you want them there. That's why you want to do it all the way through.
The concept of harmonics or harmonic play is the concept that everybody's there and everybody has a part. If you're not there, you can't. Bands naturally work off of one another. You know that, right? In harmonics, that's the most important part, is the interplay.
How many? What is the largest group you're going to have for any of those pieces?
1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's 7.
And what are they?
It's going to be bass, drums, piano, and then it's going to be Barry, tenor, alto, and trumpet.
Barry, tenor.
Barry might be
saxophones. You talking about?
Yeah, another tune. The Barry may be replaced by bass clarinet, because I just love bass clarinet.
The bass clarinet is really cool. Yeah, you don't hear that often.
I mean, the first time I heard Dolphy do it, I was just like, "Oh my God!"
And doesn't the bass clarinet look like a saxophone?
It looks like a bong, actually.
It's a big thing, yeah. But it doesn't look like a straight clarinet, is what I'm
No,
saying.
it's used a lot in avant-garde music. It's a very interesting instrument. The way Dolphy does it, I really like it. I've got a line on a bass clarinetist. I hope will be who I want. As I said, it may be a bass clarinet. I got to find somebody who can do it. It's a very interesting instrument. It's got a very interesting range, and the way I want to use it harmonically could give a very cool texture to the music.
Yeah, it makes me think about like the type of instruments that you don't see that much or hear that much anymore. One of the you said you're not as into the 20s and 30s jazz, but they're the C melody saxophone. Have you heard of the? I mean, it looks like a little toy, but it makes such an interesting sound. Frankie Trombauer was a famous C melody.
Even just the banjo. The banjo was the chordal instrument for the longest time.
Yeah. Well, but you see the banjo in different types of music. The C melody saxophone, even the baritone clarinet. People don't even know those things exist.
Yeah, it's like the bass flute, the one that looks like the sink that goes
yes,
like that.
Bass flute. Oh my God!
It looks like the first time I saw it, I said, "You steal that from the bathroom? What the hell?"
But they're so interesting, and they make such particularly interesting sounds. I also like, and it's not used that often because it's not really a jazz instrument, but the oboe in jazz is really pretty too. Creates a very.
Some people have a lot of problems with that. I was doing a wedding gig once, and the horn player was like going off on that. That shouldn't be in jazz. I'm like, what the saxophone wasn't in jazz right away.
The saxophone existed before jazz.
Yeah, but I mean, it wasn't a prevalent thing in jazz. Bix played the soprano sax, but the tenor and alto came in later. There were times when it was not considered, a jazz instrument. I don't care what you play. I mean, I remember when I used to listen to Phil Schaap, there were a couple of like jazz bagpipers, which is wild. Yeah.
That I got it.
Yeah, you can find them on YouTube. It's weird because it's a limited tonality, right?
What about Dorothy Ashby? She was a jazz harpist. Beautiful harp.
As far as I'm concerned, the instrument is immaterial. I mean, people sometimes give players, bass players for soloing. You solo once a night, maybe on a blues. I get that all the time. It's like, I say, well, let's have the tradition. Okay, fine. Let's go back to 1945. You'll die of polio. I'll get tuberculosis. Let's do the whole thing right.
Right. The Germans are marching into Poland.
Yeah. I mean, look, if we're going to go back to the 40s, let's go back to the 40s, man.
Yeah. But there are a lot of different instruments you could use in like the West Coast type of stuff. They used French horn and all these different things. Marty Page's
flute.
The flute. Well, the flute is great, especially in Basie's music. You could have some great jazz flute is just crazy. So
when you get the idea of improvisational music, whether you want to call it jazz or whatever you want to call it, what you're saying becomes the most important thing. What instrument you use, what genre you use, what harmony or lack of harmony you use, doesn't matter. What you're trying to say is, this is who I am. This is who I am right now, because 10 minutes from now, I'm going to be different. And you either like it or you don't. One of my professors used to say, it's like taking your diary, opening it up and doing this.
Right.
Now, it might be, I had pizza with my brother, right, or it could be something very embarrassing.
Or profound.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends. I used to tell guys in the ensemble class, you got to jump. You got to take the leap. If there's no net, sorry. Because if jazz like this or improvisational music like this is worthless.
Yeah.
You have to be here. You have to be at that edge at all times, or it doesn't go anywhere.
Well, there are people who aren't really familiar with that type of music, and they think that it's always a trumpet, a saxophone, a piano. Like there are great jazz violinists, and people don't even think about them. But there are some who could swing the hell out of the Joe Venuti, Stefan Grappelli, and Stuff Smith. They were all just great. I mean, you couldn't.
Like I said, the instrument is immaterial in my opinion. I don't care what you play.
I do have to check out I do have to check out those bagpipes, though.
I,
I'm
Phil Shapp, I don't know if you're familiar with when he was on WKCR. He passed away last year, but Phil Shapp was on WKCR, the Columbia or University radio station. He was a musicologist. He told at Juilliard. And he was a big Charlie Parker guy, but every once in a while he would go, and he would talk about things like, a jazz bagpiper and be like, "Are you kidding me?" And you listen to it and you're like, "Yeah," and actually bebop, actually, it's like which was amazing. As far as I'm concerned, I don't care what you're playing. I don't care what the instrument is. It's what you're going to tell me.
Well, give me the musician or band that you think is unsung, that is much better than people ever give credit for, and they don't listen enough to.
Oh man,
You gave me your penultimate, which was kind of blue, but give me your the one that you think is a hidden gem that people don't know.
A couple of. I'm going to give you a couple because we talked about Dolphy. Booker Little. He did some work with Dolphy. He didn't live very long. He died at 23, but he's a trumpet player. And I love his stuff. He reminds me a lot of Clifford Brown, but I think he's actually a little beyond. His ideas aren't trivial, but you know where they're going. If
Is
you
he
know what I mean?
Is he the same time as Clifford Brown?
Yeah, he died in 61, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And so
but he did some stuff with Dolphy at the 5 spot. Yeah, it's bop-ish, and later bop, but it's very interesting stuff. I really enjoy his stuff, and you don't hear much about it because he lived for a very short time. Blue Mitchell is another one you don't hear much of, and he's just a great trumpet player, really, really good.
And me on the kazoo. Right?
You on the kazoo.
That's all I'm giving for free. Before we finish up here, one thing first. There are not a lot of hailed as great female instrumentalists. Who would you say are the good female instrumentalists? Because there's a lot of singers, but they don't,
right. That's a hard one, man. That's really hard. A lot of people like Esperanza Spalding.
Mary Lou Williams.
Right. Terry Lynn Carrington, who's a drummer, who's quite good. There's not a lot. I mean, I'm kind of put me on the spot. I'm trying to think. I'm not off the top of my head. The problem with this, with music and its society in general, is women are trivialized in the arts. I have many, and have had many female students that were losing before they started
because
they're women.
What do you mean, though? What do you mean? That
they were trivialized. You're not that. You're not that big a deal. What are you doing? I've had students that have gotten like really like big career milestones, and I'll say, "Wow, that's really great." It's like, yeah, but I'm not this, I'm not that. Like, what are you talking about? The industry, regardless of genre, it marginalizes women, and people of color and trans people, and back in the day.
But it's definitely true. It's definitely true, women, that in jazz, other than as a vocalist, they don't get that much attention as an instrumentalist. That's why it's even sometimes hard to think. I would say Dorothy Ashby on the harp also. She was particularly interesting. But yeah, definitely Mary Lou Williams. But yeah, it's unfortunate, but maybe that'll change. And maybe there is out there. We just got to look more. Maybe the internet will help us find more,
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to happen more in like rock music. There's more and more female performers that you see,
Yeah,
but
well,
it's hard. I mean,
I was talking about specifically with jazz because
but I'm saying you see if it more, you see more of it there. Maybe it'll be more, but it's hard. I mean, a case in point. I don't know if you've ever heard of Jennifer Leatham. Jennifer Leatham was John Leatham. John Leatham played with.
Wait a minute. Do you mean John Lydom? Is that who you mean?
Leithem.
Played with Mel Torme?
With Mel Torme, he played with Doc Severinsen. In 1990, he became Jennifer Leatham.
I did.
Lost all her work.
Wow. I thought he
all her and I know her. She's a friend of mine. She is a monster. Why do I say monster? On her worst day, break both her hands. She's a monster. Swings harder than anybody you want to hear. Amazing player. You can go on the internet. She did a documentary called "I Stand Corrected," and it talks about what happened. She was doing all of these festivals, and when she transitioned, she sent her new press package. She played that festival. They didn't call her back.
But she was the same musician.
I'm just telling you that. But she lost all her work because she had transitioned. She is not only the nicest person you ever would.
The guy who played with John Caliani and Tomei and all that. You're talking about.
Yeah.
Wow.
She's now Jennifer Leatham, and she's still an amazing player. She's still got a trio. She lives in Pasadena. She's a friend of mine. She's amazing. But you can, like I said, if you look at this documentary, they just went goodbye.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so there's a lot of that in I mean it's in the world in general. I mean, even looking at Gary, I don't know if you ever know Gary Carr. He's a classical player. He's in his 80s now. Amazing educator performer. He pushed the level of solo bass. One of the problems he had in the 60s, he's gay, and it was a you could lose your job, you could lose your career just for that back in the day.
You mean he was openly gay? Because there were closeted,
as open as you could be in the 60s.
But there were closeted gay people in jazz. Right,
but I'm saying he lost some of it because his what they call back in the day his partner was his pianist. And so so those kind of things. They were, but I'm saying you could lose your career, you could lose everything and die, right? So that's been in society in general, and it affects it even in the art. You think artists are more open. Some parts artists are not as open as you would think.
Wow. Well, I definitely want to find out what is John Lydham's name now.
Jennifer Lee. She goes by. Apparently, she pronounces it Leatham. Just so you know, Leatham? It's Jennifer. Okay, you can find her on Facebook, and if you look up on the internet, you can find out her documentary "I Stand Corrected." It talks about her whole life. She's an amazing person, amazing player, nice person.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely have to check that out. I got to definitely check that out. So you're still teaching, you're still doing all your work. Where can we see your stuff?
On charleysabatino.com.
Spell that.
You can find it's on there, and I have the Charley Sabatino and Looking Forward is the name of my band. You can find that on social media on Facebook. And hopefully, if this record, I can, depending COVID notwithstanding, I can get this record in the can. I'll put it out.
So that's Charley Sabatino. That's CharleySabatino for everybody who wants .com. And I'll put that up too. All right. Well, that's awesome. And I like talking to you. I think I could talk to you forever, but I'm going to run out of space.
Well, we should do this again, either on camera or off camera, because it's been too long.
Absolutely. We got to do this again. And now that I got my axe. Do you name your instruments?
No, they're tools. They're named by what they are. That's the Lakeland. My upright is a Hawks. The company that made it was Hawks. That's the Hawks.
I named my kazoo. My kazoo's name is Wasserman. I have a Jewish kazoo. Yes. So I was gonna ask you maybe if you wanted to play something, but maybe it's not. Maybe you don't feel like it right now. But awesome, great conversation. Thank you for being here, Charley.
It's my pleasure. I had a great time.
And yeah, we got to definitely do it again. I think we've only cracked the surface. We only talked about jazz. We didn't even talk about, we could talk about so many other different types of music, although jazz is my favorite. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is I, the Great Goonan. This has been the Great Goonan Podcast, and I've been talking with musician Charley Sabatino. See you next time, folks. Peace.
Sick in the head.